Sometimes I don't understand the horror community because a lot of us in the community scream and cry for unique horror movies. Something different, something we haven't seen before, something that's not a franchise. Then as soon as we get one, it's an absolute piece of crap and people bash it to high hell. I don't understand the horror community sometimes.
You are listening to the Cabin of Horrors podcast. Go behind the scenes of all your favorite horror movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. I am your host, the incredible Josh.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning into the Cabin of Horrors podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed the Nightmare on Elm Street review that we just wrapped up. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to do, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to go over every Nightmare on Elm Street film from 1 to 6, A New Nightmare, talk a little bit about the reboot, and really harness in onto how Freddy Krueger became a horror icon and how his demise ultimately came to be. So thank you everyone who took the time to listen to that series. I hope you really enjoyed it. Like I said in that series, our next franchise review will be coming in March. And obviously, with the release of Scream 6, it's going to be Scream. So stay tuned for that coming in March. And also stay tuned for April 13th, in case you haven't heard. Nightmare on the 13th, which is the next project to be dropping from Cabin of Horrors, will be going live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors on April 13th, where it's going to be a reimagining of your horror movies in a 1960s horror radio show format. So it's going to bring a lot of the stories that we love from horror movies into a format that has been lost, that has been forgotten. And it's something that I really want to bring back and have as a form of entertainment for everyone. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. Stay tuned for that. Make sure you're following me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors, so that you don't miss the notification when we go live. So we're back to our regularly scheduled programming, and today we're going to be going over a movie I recently watched that has completely divided the horror community, yet at the same time is probably the most unique horror movie that we have gotten in maybe a decade, 2 decades even, maybe even of the 2000s. We're talking about Skinamarink, which is a low-budget horror movie filmed in Edmonton, Canada, and has absolutely taken the horror community by storm. There's no middle ground in this movie. I haven't seen a single comment or a single review that is middle ground on this movie. You either love this movie to death like I do, or you hate this movie to death, and you hate everybody who likes this movie. Now, I understand why, though. I'm on the side of that this movie is a masterclass in horror. It was absolutely terrifying. I put this movie on the same level as The Exorcist. This movie shook me to my core. It literally had me engaged. My eyes could not leave the screen the entire time, and I was frightened. I was terrified watching this movie. Even talking to you guys and thinking about scenes from that movie, I'm getting goosebumps right now. And I'm borderline scared to even talk about this movie again because, I kid you not, this movie shook me to my core. But at the same time, I get it for the people who don't like it. This movie is not for everyone. It truly is not. This movie is for the people who grew up as kids, having nightmares, having sleep paralysis, being afraid of the dark, having those childhood fears, those irrational childhood fears. This movie capitalizes on those fears you had as a child. I guarantee it, if you ever were afraid of the dark as a kid, if you ever had sleep paralysis, or you ever had reoccurring nightmares as a child, this movie will impact you in a really fucked up way. I will tell you that right now. But it's still not for everyone. It's very much a movie that the plot is what you make it. There's not really a narrative in this movie. There's not really anything that gives you a sense of what's actually happening. You start to kind of guess and kind of uncover what's going on throughout the movie, But that's only if you really dive into it, right? You have to give this movie the time of day. You have to be able to sit and engage and watch this movie without any distractions. That way you can really use your imagination in a sense and make it the plot itself what you want it to be. It's hard to explain. It's one of those unique horror movies that really capitalize on the fear of the unknown, suspense, and your own imagination in crafting the horror. And by God, it can be a terrifying experience, I'm telling you right now. So the director of Skinamarink is Kyle Edward Ball, and this film is his directorial debut. Previously, before Skinamarink, Ball had run a YouTube channel called Bite-Sized Nightmares. And on this channel, he'd ask viewers to post comments about their nightmares, and then he would shoot recreations of those nightmares. Skinamarink was inspired by the tropes that kept reoccurring the most in the most commonly submitted nightmares. The film was preceded by a 2020 proof of concept short film, which was titled Heck, and that was also, of course, directed by Ball. The inspiration for the film's title, Skinamarink, of course, it came from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, the Sharon, Lois, and Bram version. This was a very intrinsic part of Ball's childhood. And another reason that he was drawn to Skinamarink as the film's title was because of its public domain status, also the way the hard K sounds, and its personal relevance to him, among many others. He also slightly altered the spelling. You'll notice that with Skinamarink, it's not spelt the same way. He altered it slightly so that young children who were searching online for the song wouldn't accidentally find the film, which I think is great, because that absolutely would happen. I've got a kid myself. I've got a 10-year-old kid, and I know if he was, listening to Skinamarink on YouTube, and he typed in Skinamarink, and then, let's say a thumbnail came up of the Skinamarink movie poster, he's into horror, he'd watch it. Do I want him to watch this movie? Absolutely fucking not. Absolutely fucking not. So I'm grateful. As a dad, I'm grateful that he made that adjustment. As I mentioned before, Skinamarink is a low-budget horror movie. But, Terrifier 2 was also a low-budget horror movie, right? Skinamarink was as low as it gets. Skinamarink's budget was $15,000. 15. $15,000. Keep that in mind when we get to the box office numbers. I'll remind you, but this film was only made on $15,000, which is fucking crazy, and most of that was crowdfunded. So the film was shot digitally, with Jamie McRae serving as the film's cinematographer, and they filmed it in Ball's childhood home in Edmonton, Canada. Because the budget was so limited, the film was made mostly using equipment borrowed from the local Film and Video Arts Society of Alberta. And the film became really personal for Ball. In an interview, he stated that shooting a movie in the house you grew up in, about two characters that are more or less you and your sister, I didn't have to try to make it more personal, it just sort of happened. And then an added benefit was my mom had saved a bunch of childhood toys that we used in the movie, so it got even more personal. And there's truly tons of inspiration from different horror directors that you can see in Skinamarink. Some of the filmmakers that Ball cited as inspiration to the film were Stan Brakhage, Maya Deren, Stanley Kubrick, and David Lynch. He also stated that he was very much inspired by the 1974 slasher film Black Christmas, saying that Black Christmas has a lot of shots where they're just panning. I would refer to it when talking with my director of photography who hadn't seen Black Christmas, saying, "This is my Black Christmas shot." There's also cartoons that are seen throughout the movie in Skinamarink. It almost seems like the cartoons are the kids' safe place, and Ball was very smart with this. He used public domain cartoons, like the 1936 cartoon Somewhere in Dreamland and the 1935 cartoon Balloonland, all being public domain shorts. Now, Skinamarink just hit popularity this year, right? It literally just blew up over the past month. But it is, and I just found this out as well, it is actually not a 2023 horror movie. I thought it was. I had been talking about this like it was my first 2023 horror movie, but it actually came out last year. It premiered at the 26th Fantasia International Film Festival in Montreal, Canada on July 25th, 2022. Skinamarink then went on to screen at several other film festivals, including some that had offered at-home viewing options. And because of a technical issue, one of the festival platforms actually allowed the film's digital file to be pirated. This version was constantly uploaded to YouTube. There was excerpts going to TikTok, Reddit, Twitter, and it started getting a lot of word of mouth. Similar to, of course, how some of the great horror movies of the day did, right? Terrifier 2, word of mouth started with everybody puking in the theaters and shit and fainting and all that shit. That's what really spawned Terrifier 2's success. Halloween 1978, same deal. Everybody talked about it. Everybody spread the word, and then more theaters got the movie. Similar here with Skinamarink. TikTok videos even deemed it one of the scariest films ever made, and it was even said that the videos were traumatizing everyone on TikTok. Now, Ball was disappointed that the film was pirated, but he was thankful at the same time for the positive reaction that the film was getting. So because of the huge hype surrounding the film, AMC Networks acquired the rights for Skinamarink, the distribution rights, and there was a theatrical release via IFC Films. Skinamarink was theatrically released in both Canada and the United States on January 13th, 2023 at 629 theaters. In the US, the film opened on partial schedules across the country, with showtimes being added in accordance to demand and availability at the theaters. Skinamarink also screened in the UK, with showings taking place at the Prince Charles Cinema in London and Mockingbird Cinema in Birmingham. The film was then released for everyone to stream online on Shudder on February 2nd, 2023, which is where I saw it. I watched it on Shudder. So if you guys want to check it out, go get Shudder. It's on there. Now we're going to talk about the box office. Now keep in mind, this film was made on a $15,000 budget. 15,000. 15,000. It grossed $746,000 over the first 3 days of its release. 3 days. The film's gross rose to $798,000, and now it's well over $1 million. I think the last number I looked at was it is at $1.2 million for box office on a $15,000 budget. That's crazy. Oh no, I'm mistaken, guys. Box office is $2 million. So they made $2 million at the box office on a $15,000 budget. How crazy is that? That knocks Terrifier 2's profit margin out of the fucking water. $15,000 and you made $2 million. That's just amazing to me. And it goes to show you how much unique horror is wanted. Right? Despite all of the hate, despite everybody bashing this movie, it still made $2 million. And you can't argue that. Right? Obviously people love the film. And I don't think, you can't... And I know I always say, if a horror movie makes this much bank, it's going to turn into a franchise, blah, blah, blah. But I don't see that for Skinamarink. There's no way. There's really no way you could turn this into a franchise. And I truly don't believe there's any way that Ball could even recreate this. This film couldn't be recreated. It's just, it can't. It's a piece of art. There's no way you could recreate it, you could sequel it, you could prequel it, nothing. It is a film that stands on its own and can stand the test of time. This film is going to be a cult classic. This is going to be one of those films that kids dare the other kids to watch. It will absolutely be a cult classic film. I guarantee it. Now, we're going to head into talking about the film Skinamarink. What happens in this film? I truly don't believe I will do it enough justice because it's hard to describe this movie. And it's really hard to encapsulate everything, the ambiance, the atmosphere, how terrifying it is in this film. So I hope I do it enough justice that you're at least a little bit curious to watch it. But I'm telling you, if you're going to watch this movie, have zero distractions and engage yourself completely in the movie. Immerse yourself in the ambiance of this movie. That is the best chance you have at enjoying it and being absolutely fucking terrified. So the year is 1995. And we meet 4-year-old Kevin, who injures himself in what his 6-year-old sister Kaylee says is a sleepwalking incident. Kevin's then taken to the hospital and brought back home. His father calls someone and tells them that the hospital didn't need to give Kevin stitches and he had only hit his head. Sometime later, the two siblings wake up in the middle of the night to find that their father has just disappeared, and the windows, doors, and other objects in the house are also starting to vanish as well. Kevin suggests that him and his sister sleep downstairs where they watch cartoons on a television. And this was really cool for me in Skinamarink, is that you're going to see a lot of the time that the kids are sitting around and watching cartoons, and I feel like Ball did a good job of making that the kids' safe space, because it always seems that when they're there watching cartoons, there's nothing that can get them. The entity or whatever the fuck is happening here, nothing can happen to them. It is their safe space. And there's a lot of tones in this movie as well on like childhood abandonment and just that childhood fear of not knowing what to do and not feeling safe. The movie did a really good job of putting you back into that childhood feeling of just moments where you didn't feel safe, you know? And the scariest part of all is that you watch Skinamarink through the eyes of a child. The way the film is shot, the angles, everything, you are experiencing the entire film from the perspective of a child, which makes it even that much more terrifying, I'm telling you. So the kids end up falling asleep to cartoons, and they wake up to find that the house is dark. They hear an unexplained thumping noise, and then they find a chair standing upside down on the ceiling, which is absolutely terrifying all on its own. So Kevin asks Kaylee where she thinks their father is. She replies that she doesn't know, but then Kevin suggests that maybe he went with Mom. Where's Mom? We have no idea. So Kevin shows Kaylee that the toilet in the downstairs bathroom has also just randomly disappeared. So Kaylee decides to accompany Kevin to the upstairs bathroom, where they find a doll on a bedroom ceiling. Kevin returns to tell her that he's now way too scared to use the toilet, so they decide to place 2 buckets in the downstairs bathroom, when a mysterious voice calls to Kaylee from the darkness, telling her to come upstairs. So Kaylee decides she's going to head upstairs while Kevin remains downstairs. In a bedroom, Kaylee sees their father, who tells her to look under the bed. In one of the most terrifying moments of the film for me. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I was always scared of the monster under the bed. Right? Like, that was one of the big things for me as a kid, was that darkness under the bed. And think about it. Imagine walking into a room. You're already terrified from your environment and the ambiance of what's going on in your house. And you see your dad with his back to you in a dark room, sitting on a bed. And he calls you over and says, look under the bed. How fucking terrifying would that be? That would be fucking terrifying. Okay? So Kaylee looks under the bed, but she doesn't see anything. However, when she puts her head up from looking under the bed, her dad's gone, and she sees her mother sitting now on the opposite side of the bed from where her dad was sitting. Her mother tells Kaylee that they love her and Kevin, and then instructs her to close her eyes before she just vanishes. Kaylee looks up at the pitch-black open closet in front of her and hears her mother say, "There's someone here." And from the closet, she can hear her mother calling out her name, as well as moans of pain and breaking of bones. And that was something Skinamarink did really well. You didn't see anything in this scene, you just heard it, right? It did really well with the audio side of things in this movie, because when you don't see it but you can hear it, you've got that fear of the unknown, your imagination's running wild, Lord knows what kind of terrifying things you're thinking of. And that's half the fun of Skinamarink. So Kaylee returns downstairs and Kevin asks her what happened, only for her to respond with asking Kevin to help her move the couch. So Kaylee and Kevin push the couch to block off the hallway from which the voice was calling out to her. Kevin falls asleep, and then the voice calls out to Kaylee again. Kevin wakes up, and he ends up calling out for Kaylee, but she doesn't reply. There's Lego bricks, VHS tapes, and other toys and objects which are now suspended against the wall. The voice then calls out to Kevin, calling him to come into the basement. So he does, where he sees Kaylee, who no longer has eyes or a mouth. He books it back upstairs, where he hears the mysterious voice calling to him again, telling him that it wants to play, as some of the toys in the house also begin to disappear. There's a drawer that opens in the kitchen, and Kevin complies with the voice's command that he insert a knife into one of his own eyes. Kevin then picks up a telephone, calls 911, and he whispers to the operator that he was cut with a knife and that he feels sick. The operator tells him to stay on the line and that adults will be on their way to help. The operator then asks why he's whispering, if there's someone else in the room with him, and where he is in the house. Kevin says that he's downstairs and the doors have disappeared before dropping the phone. The phone then turns into a chatter telephone toy, and the voice claims responsibility for doing it, telling Kevin that it can basically do anything. It says that Kaylee didn't do as it told her. She said that she wanted her parents, so it took away her mouth. It tells Kevin to come upstairs, and he obeys. While holding a flashlight, he finds himself now on the ceiling. He walks into a bedroom, which then becomes a void. We find out now that it's been 572 days, and there's a pile of toys which are sitting in a seemingly endless hallway. A figure is seen sitting on the side of a bed which slowly fades away, which was a terrifying fucking moment. There's also photos of people with missing facial features appearing in the darkness. Kevin cries out as blood splatters onto the floor, then disappears, and splatters again, and then disappears. Kevin screams for his mother, and then asks if he can watch something happy. A door appears in the darkness, and later an indistinct face. The face tells Kevin to go to sleep. Kevin asks for its name, and is met with silence as the movie fades to black. Now, I did my best with that because it's just so hard to describe and encapsulate it. You need to watch this film. Like I'm telling you right now, if you were looking for a unique supernatural horror film, this is it. This is it. But like I said before, it's not for everyone, right? Not everyone's going to like this movie, and I understand that because it is slow. It's definitely the kind of movie that you need to engage yourself in, really think about what's going on. Don't expect it to guide you because it won't. There is no true, real narrative. Like, I did my best in putting that narrative together. Like, there really, truly is no narrative to the film. It's what you make of it as you're watching it. But I did my best in quote-unquote guiding it for you, so I hope you watch the movie. If you did watch the movie, I'd love to know what you think about it, because it's such a divisive horror movie. A lot of people love it and a lot of people hate it. So come on over to my Instagram, instagram.com/Cabin of Horrors podcast, and drop a comment on one of my posts. Let me know what you thought of Skinamarink, because I love to hear what all of you think about the movies I review. I love hearing your opinions. Whether or not you agree with me doesn't matter. I love to see all the different perspectives and just talk with you guys about horror movies. Even if you have recommendations or you have questions about horror movies, I actually had one of my favorite followers reach out over the weekend because they had bought some horror movies and they wanted to know about them. I love that stuff. I love sharing my knowledge on horror movies with you guys. So if there's a movie that you guys have a question on, you're like, hey, I want to watch this. I haven't seen it. Chances are I've probably seen it. So shoot me a message. I'll let you know if I think it's any good, and I'll give you my thoughts on the movie, and it might, sway you either way, whether or not you want to watch it. But that wraps us up for the Skinamarink portion of this podcast. And as we're back to our regularly scheduled programming, that means now we head into our 80s in review series. So we're going back to 1984. And we're going to talk about a movie that I actually haven't seen in a very long time. It's been a while since I've seen this movie, and I might have to rewatch it because it actually has been that long. We're talking about Children of the Corn, which is a supernatural slasher film based on the 1977 short story by none other than Stephen King. If you've never heard about it before, it tells the story of a malevolent entity referred to as He Who Walks Behind the Rose, which entices the town's children to ritually murder all the town's adults, as well as a couple driving across the country to ensure a successful corn harvest. King definitely got into a little bit of a scuffle when it came to developing this film. The rights were originally optioned by Hal Roach Studios, and Stephen King had wrote a script based on his own short story. However, they didn't want to use King's script, and they hired George Goldsmith to rewrite it. Goldsmith said that King's script started with 35 pages of Bert and Vicky arguing in a car. So Goldsmith decided that he wanted to tell the story visually through the eyes of two new characters, children Job and Sarah. King was totally unhappy with these changes. They debated back and forth during a phone conversation, which King argued that Goldsmith didn't understand the horror genre, and Goldsmith argued that King didn't recognize the film as a visual external experience, unlike novels and short stories, which are internal and only visual in the reader's mind. Shooting of the film happened in Iowa, in Hornick, Iowa, Whitting, Iowa, Salix, Iowa, and Sergeant Bluff, Iowa. Goldsmith did credit King, though, with being extremely gracious when asked about the film in media interviews, stating in diplomatic ways that he felt the new approach to be lacking. Eventually, the project was sold to New World Pictures, which decided to go with Goldsmith's script, although it tried unsuccessfully to remove his name from the credits in favor of Stephen King's, because of the fact that if you put Stephen King's name on a horror movie in the 80s, well, there's much higher chance that it's going to be a successful movie. And after the film was released, Goldsmith revealed that much of the story behind the film was a metaphor for the Iranian Revolution, with the takeover of the town being quasi-religious zealots acting for an evil quote-unquote god, which resembled the events of the Iranian Revolution. Now, similar to Skinamarink, I know that there is some divide on Children of the Corn in the horror community. I know that some people love it and some people hate it. I know there are some middle ground. I've seen some middle grounds for Children of the Corn, but a lot of people don't really like the movie, and I don't blame them. It's not your typical Stephen King horror movie that was coming out from the 80s, right? There was definitely a different approach to the film, especially compared to the short story, but overall, I feel Children of the Corn can stand itself. Could it have spawned the franchise that it spawned? I really don't think so, to be completely honest with you. I don't think Children of the Corn was good enough for the franchise that we have today. I don't think any other entries in the franchise were really that good, per se. I think I watched 2 and 3, and then that's where I stopped. But the first one was pretty good. The first one, I feel, can stand on its own, stand as itself, and remain a cult classic. In 2008, there was actually a TV remake happening of the first film, which was being written and directed by Donald Borchers, and was set to premiere on the Sci-Fi Channel. Production began in August of that year, filming in Davenport, Iowa, but was later moved to Lost Nation, Iowa. It ended up being a made-for-TV movie, which aired on September 26, 2009, and the DVD was released on October 6 by Anchor Bay. And this television remake, it closely followed the original storyline that was present in the short story, and not that of the original film. There was also a new film adaptation directed by Kurt Wimmer and produced by Lucas Foster, which was filmed in Australia during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was initially reported to be a remake, but the film served as a prequel to the 1984 film, and was released on October 23rd in 2020. And when the film released back in 1984, it definitely made a lot of bank. So the budget for Children of the Corn was $800,000, which is a pretty nominal sum for a horror movie in 1984. And it went on to make $14.6 million at the box office. So obviously it's not surprising that a franchise spawned from this, regardless of whether or not it should have, because it made over $13 million. So not surprised it spawned a franchise, not surprised it made money, but I also feel like if they didn't put Stephen King's name on it, it wouldn't have been as successful as it was, especially during this time. Like, any movie that had Stephen King's name on it in the 80s was destined to make good money. That's just the way it was, especially for horror movies. Like, Stephen King was the master of literary horror in the 1980s, no doubt. So without further ado, let's dive in. Let's talk about the plot of Children of the Corn and everything that happens in this movie. So the film starts off in the fictional town of Gatlin, Nebraska, which is an agricultural community surrounded by huge cornfields. When the corn crop fails that year, the townsfolk turn to prayer to ensure a successful harvest. However, there's a 9-year-old named Isaac Kroner who takes all of the children in Gatlin into the cornfields and he indoctrinates them into a religious cult, which is based around a bloodthirsty deity called He Who Walks Behind the Rose. Isaac and his subordinate Malachi lead the children in a revolution, murdering all of the adults in the town as human sacrifices. Children Job and his sister Sarah are uninvolved in these sacrifices, having not attended the meetings in the cornfield with the other children, though Sarah has visions portrayed through drawings. We fast forward now 3 years later. Vicky and her boyfriend Bert are traveling through rural Nebraska on their way to Seattle. Elsewhere, there's a young boy named Joseph who's trying to free Gatlin, but is attacked in the corn. He stumbles out into the road, and Bert accidentally runs over him. However, Bert discovers that his throat was cut before he even hit him. Bert and Vicky place Joseph's body and his suitcase in their trunk, and they search for a phone to call for help. They find Dale, an elderly mechanic and the last adult in Gatlin, but he refuses them service, as he's agreed to supply the children with fuel in exchange for his own life. However, Malachi breaks the pact and murders him against Isaac's wishes after Dale tries to steer the couple away from Gatlin. Vicky and Bert end up exploring the abandoned town, and they find Sarah alone in a house. Vicky stays with her while Bert searches the town, and Malachi and his followers appear. They capture Vicky and take her to the cornfield, where they place her on a cross to be sacrificed. Bert enters the church, where a congregation of children led by a girl named Rachel are performing a cultural birthday ritual for Amos by drinking his blood from a pentagram-shaped cut on his body. Amos has just turned 19, so he's considered old enough for his quote-unquote passing, which means joining their god in the cornfield. Bert scolds the children for participating in this blood ritual. Rachel ends up stabbing Bert, and then Malachi and the others chase him. Job rescues Bert, and they hide in a fallout shelter with Sarah, where they learn that Vicky has been captured by the children. The zealous Isaac scolds Malachi for his treachery in killing Dale, who at the time was their only source of fuel. So Malachi takes over, who's tired of Isaac's preaching, and orders Isaac to be sacrificed instead of Vicky. Isaac warns Malachi that sacrificing him will break their pact with He Who Walks Behind the Rose, and the children will be severely punished for this. That same night, Bert sneaks into a cornfield to rescue Vicky, but during Isaac's sacrifice, a supernatural light appears and seemingly devours him. Bert emerges and overpowers Malachi, then convinces the children to abandon the cult completely and run for safety. However, Isaac suddenly reappears. He was revived by He Who Walks Behind the Rose. He informs Malachi that the deity is angered over him being sacrificed, and that He Who Walks Behind the Rose wants Malachi sacrificed as well for his betrayal, so Isaac ends up killing Malachi. A storm then appears over the cornfield, and Bert, Vicky, and the rest of the children all gain shelter in a barn. Bert begins to read a passage from the Bible that Job gives him. Job also reveals that the police officer tried to set up the gas-a-hole to stop He Who Walks Behind the Rose, but Malachi murdered him before he could finish. Vicky rereads the passage and realizes that the cornfield must be destroyed by fire in order to stop the false god. So Bert sprays the entire cornfield and tosses a Molotov cocktail into the field, setting it ablaze, completely destroying the demon along with Isaac. Vicky, Bert, Job, and Sarah all return to the car and leave Gatlin, but find it disabled. Rachel shows up and ends up attacking Bert, but Vicky knocks her out with the car door. Bert worries about leaving her there, but Vicky quips that they will send her a get-well card from Seattle, and they head out with the children on foot. And that's Children of the Corn. It's a decent movie. I wouldn't say this is, the Mount Rushmore of 80s horror movies or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's a great kind of, children's horror movie, which is one of the reasons I wanted to pick it. Especially to be reviewed alongside Skinamarink. I felt that the two have kind of similar undertones, where the adults have disappeared and the children are kind of left on their own to their own devices and figuring things out. Very similar undertones in that way, so that's kind of why I wanted to do Children of the Corn. And also, unfortunately, I've already reviewed the best horror movie of 1984, which was A Nightmare on Elm Street, so my choices were slim pickings. I could have reviewed Friday the 13th Part 3, Final Chapter, I could have, but I'm saving that, because there is a Friday the 13th in October. So you can only imagine what I'm planning for October. That's going to be the franchise review of October. It's the best time to do it, right? Friday the 13th. Do a Friday the 13th franchise review. Abso-freaking-lutely. So that's why I'm not reviewing Friday the 13th. And then there was Firestarter, but that Firestarter never got me. I don't know. I don't know what it is about Firestarter. That movie just never really resonated with me. I don't like it. I watched it. I didn't watch the remake. I watched the first one with Drew Barrymore, and it just never hit me as a horror movie, so I wasn't going to review that. So Children of the Corn it was. I know it's not the best, but it's still a good one. It's still a good cult classic horror movie. But that also wraps us up for this episode of Cabin of Horrors podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you guys are really enjoying listening to these episodes. I enjoy creating them, so I hope you're getting a lot of enjoyment out of it too. Make sure you're following me on Instagram if you want all of the updates right away on Cabin of Horrors. Instagram.com/Cabin of Horrors podcast. I always announce what movies I'm going to be reviewing on the podcast, usually the Thursday or Friday before the episode drops, so make sure you're following and you'll know what you're going to be listening to ahead of time. And I'll be back again with a brand new episode next week. What are we reviewing? Well, you're going to have to wait and find out. But until then, see you in the shadows.